Roman army is considered the most disciplined military machine in human history. We're used to thinking of legionnaires as soulless robots, ready to die at their commander's first command. But the reality was far more complex, grueling and completely unlike anything seen in Hollywood movies. Imagine 500,000 armed men scattered across a vast territory, stretching from foggy Britain to the scorching sands of Syria. Now ask yourself, how do you keep this enormous crowd from scattering at the first sign of real danger? It sounds crazy, but desertion was one of the main problems facing Roman generals for centuries. In times of crisis, when the empire was falling apart at the seams, the legions lost thousands of soldiers, not in battle, but on the march. People would simply toss their heavy gear into the bushes and vanish into the night, hoping to return to a normal life. This seems completely illogical for an invincible army that had conquered nearly the entire known world at the time. But in reality, the Romans were just ordinary people who wanted to live, eat well, and sleep in a warm bed. In this video, we'll break down the entire structure of Roman control over their massive military machine. You'll learn how the ancient manhunt system worked and why deserters were sometimes pardoned on the spot. We'll delve into the daily lives of ordinary legionnaires and understand how a group of 8 comrades meant the world to them. And at the end, we'll compare this model to modern methods used by elite units around the world. Buckle up, because we're heading into the grim but incredibly fascinating world of ancient military discipline. When we look at a map of the Roman Empire at the height of its power, the sheer scale of the conquered territories is simply mind-boggling. Rome controlled lands stretching from rainy Scotland to the scorching sands of Egypt, holding it all together with an army of 500,000 men. But let's be honest, these 500,000 men were not comic book superheroes, immune to fear and fatigue. They were ordinary farmers, blacksmiths, and urban poor, clad in armor and sent to the ends of the earth. And many of them had absolutely no desire to be there, especially once they understood the reality of military service. Roman propaganda loved to tell stories of the incredible valor and iron discipline of its invincible legions. But internal documents and letters from commanders paint a completely different, far darker, and more down-to-earth picture. During times of crisis, especially during civil wars or large-scale invasions, desertion took on the character of a veritable epidemic. Soldiers did not leave one by one. They would disappear in entire groups, taking valuable government property with them. This was a massive problem that threatened to bring down the entire military logistics system of the most powerful state of antiquity. Why then did they flee, despite severe punishments and oaths of loyalty to the ruling emperor? The answer lies in the unbearable conditions of service, which a modern office worker simply could not endure for more than a week. Legionnaires carried 30 kilograms of equipment on their backs, marching 30 kilometers a day in all kinds of weather. After such a march, they didn't go to sleep. Instead, they grabbed shovels and spent several hours building a fortified camp. Modern fitness trainers would call this extreme CrossFit, but for the Romans, it was just a Tuesday evening. Add to that appalling sanitation, constant illness, and disgusting food during long northern campaigns. An ancient soldier was more likely to die from a common infection or an upset stomach than from an enemy spear thrust. Medicine at the time treated wounds with vinegar and wine, which in itself sounds like a recipe for a strange marinade. Watching their comrades rot alive in field hospitals, many recruits began to seriously question their life choices. The fear of such an inglorious death in the mud often outweighed any loyalty to the legion's golden eagles. But here it gets even more interesting, because desertion rarely occurred right in the middle of a major battle. In the heat of battle, there was simply nowhere to run, and the enemy cavalry quickly cut down any stragglers. Most desertions took place during tedious, grueling marches or during long winter encampments. At night, a soldier would simply gather his belongings, quietly slip past the patrols, and disappear into the dense forest. The next morning, the centurion would find a soldier missing, and the military machine would be forced to set in motion a complex process to track down the missing property. Yes, you heard that right. A deserter was considered not just a traitor, but also stolen state property. Rome spent enormous sums on weapons, armor, and months of training for each recruit in training camps. Today, training a single Marine costs the US budget tens of thousands of dollars, and the military does not like to lose such investments. Roman senators thought in exactly the same terms, only instead of dollars, they counted silver denarii. A legionary who fled was literally carrying away a chunk of the state budget, which had to be recovered immediately. The scale of the problem was so great that emperors had to issue special decrees imposing penalties for harboring fugitives. Ordinary peasants were strictly forbidden from helping deserters, giving them food, or hiding them in their barns on pain of death. This meant that the local population often sympathized with the soldiers and helped them hide from the authorities. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Romans cracked down harshly on this phenomenon, making it a crime against the emperor himself to aid a fugitive. And yet, thousands of young men risked everything for a slim chance to return home to their abandoned families. They traded their gleaming armor for rags, hid in the mountains, and often joined the ranks of common bandits. In some provinces, gangs of former soldiers became such a formidable force that regular troops had to be sent against them. This is a paradox of history. The army, created to defend the state, itself gave rise to its most vicious internal enemies. And to break this vicious cycle, Rome had to create one of the world's first internal security services. Imagine the scale of the task. Finding one specific person in a territory inhabited by tens of millions of people. They had no photographs, biometric passports, electronic databases, or facial recognition systems on the streets. All information about a person boiled down to a verbal description and entries in the legion's thick ledgers. But the Roman bureaucracy was incredibly meticulous and methodical, which made escape an extremely difficult task. They knew how to find a needle in a haystack, especially if that needle owed money to the Great Rome. As a result, the problem of desertion became the very catalyst that forced the army to evolve and become more complex. Generals had to acknowledge that fear of the enemy was often weaker than fear of the unbearable conditions of army life. They needed to strike a balance between the harshest discipline and simply keeping their subordinates sane. And what they devised in response is still studied today in modern military academies around the world. But we'll discuss these ingenious methods of retaining soldiers in the next chapter of our historical investigation. How is it even possible to find a deserter in a world without the internet or street surveillance cameras? Modern police use smartphone and bank card tracking to catch a criminal within a couple of days. The Romans had to rely solely on parchment, ink, and an incredibly extensive network of informants throughout the empire. Each legionnaire had his own detailed file describing his distinguishing features, scars, and even eye color. When a soldier went missing, this information was instantly copied and distributed to key checkpoints throughout the province. But there is one interesting detail that made Roman soldiers easily recognizable in any diverse crowd. Years of wearing heavy armor, a distinctive gait from endless marches, and strap marks on their shoulders gave them away completely. In addition, many legionaries had tattoos, indicating their affiliation with a specific military unit. It was a kind of army tradition that, in the event of desertion, became irrefutable evidence against them. Try explaining to a patrol that you're just a simple peasant when you have the number of the 5th Legion tattooed on your forearm. To track down such fugitives, Rome created special agents known as frumentari or beneficiari. Originally, these men were responsible for procuring grain for the army, but gradually their duties expanded significantly and unexpectedly. They became a veritable secret police force that spied, collected taxes, and tracked down state criminals. These agents were stationed at key road junctions, crossroads, and border outposts, checking all suspicious travelers. In effect, it was the ancient FBI, operating under the cover of the Legion's ordinary quartermaster service. The frumentari had the right to stop any traveler and demand to see their official travel documents. If a person could not clearly explain who they were and where they were going, They were immediately detained until the circumstances were clarified. Taverns and inns always had paid informants on hand, ready to turn in a suspicious stranger for a couple of silver coins. Innkeepers themselves had a vested interest in cooperating, since harboring a deserter could result in the confiscation of all their property. This system of widespread surveillance made traveling without documents virtually impossible for a fugitive soldier. Sounds like total paranoia, right? But let's look at this objectively from the perspective of ancient national security. A deserter was a professional assassin, trained in tactics, weaponry, and survival in the wild. Allowing such people to roam the provinces unsupervised was tantamount to handing out loaded pistols on the street. Therefore, the state spared no expense in maintaining its agents and paying bounties for the capture of dangerous fugitives. Interestingly, the search for deserters was sometimes entrusted to special cavalry units that combed through the countryside. These patrols moved quickly, checked remote farms, and hunted down groups of fugitives hiding in the woods. My grandfather used to say that you can't outrun a vicious dog, but escaping the Roman cavalry was even harder. They knew the terrain, had excellent horses, and were incredibly motivated to bring their strayed comrades back into the ranks. The chances of an exhausted fugitive on foot breaking away from such a pursuit were virtually zero. But what happened if a soldier did manage to cross the border and flee into the territory of hostile tribes? The barbarians often welcomed Roman defectors with open arms, as they possessed invaluable military knowledge and skills. Deserters could teach local tribes Roman tactics, point out weaknesses in their defenses, and repair broken weapons. For Rome, such defectors posed a huge threat, and special sabotage units were sent after them. The empire showed no mercy to those who not only fled, but also defected to an active geopolitical adversary. However, the bureaucratic machine had its own vulnerabilities, which clever and calculating fugitives actively exploited. Corruption in ancient Rome was commonplace, and for a hefty bribe, one could purchase forged travel documents. Some centurions, in exchange for a share of the looted property, would list a deserter among those who had died of fever. This is a classic fraudulent scheme that still operates in some modern Third World armies. Bureaucracy is strong on paper, but on the ground it is run by people whose greed often outweighs their sense of duty. Nevertheless, the Roman manhunt system was astonishingly effective for its modest technological level. The combination of total control on the roads, a spy network, and bureaucratic record-keeping created a tight net around every legion. A soldier knew that outside the camp walls, freedom did not await him, but rather the status of an outcast hunted by the entire empire. This psychological barrier deterred more people from escaping than even the tallest and thickest wooden walls. Isolation and the fear of being caught were far more effective at keeping people in check than any physical shackles. But capture was only the first part of this harsh Milesian ballet, inevitably followed by a trial. The way the Romans punished the guilty may seem to a modern person like the embodiment of unmotivated and primitive cruelty. However, their actions always revealed a cold, calculated logic aimed at strictly maintaining order. The legion's justice system could be both ruthless and surprisingly merciful, depending on the situation. Let's take a closer look at what awaited a deserter when he was brought back to his home camp with his hands bound. When a captured deserter was returned to camp, his fate depended on a multitude of small details. Roman military law was not blind. It clearly distinguished between the circumstances of the escape and the motives of the offending soldier. It was one thing if a young recruit panicked during a grueling march and fled due to physical exhaustion. It was quite another if a veteran planned his escape before an important battle, abandoning his comrades to mortal danger. The legion commander always served as the judge and had the authority to hand down sentences, including immediate execution. The classic punishment for desertion in peacetime was a brutal flogging and dishonorable discharge from service. The guilty party was publicly flogged before the entire unit so that the others could fully enjoy this instructive spectacle. Afterward, he was expelled from the camp in disgrace, stripped of all his savings, his pension, and his status as a respected veteran. In Roman society, such a man became a pariah, forever barred from any respectable employment. It was social suicide, which for many proud citizens seemed more terrifying than actual physical death. But if a soldier deserted during combat operations, the punishment became as cruel and inevitable as possible. Such traitors faced certain death, often in the most painful and humiliating manner imaginable. They could be crucified along busy roads or thrown to wild beasts in the arena of the nearest amphitheatre. The Romans loved to turn executions into theatrical performances with a profound moral lesson for the assembled spectators. The sight of a deserter writhing on the cross served as an excellent motivational poster for all the other active legionnaires. And this is where it gets interesting. Roman pragmatism often outweighed a blind thirst for blood. Commanders understood that executing a trained soldier meant throwing away a massive government investment. Therefore, the army had an unofficial amnesty system for those who sincerely repented and returned voluntarily. If a deserter came back on his own and apologized, he might simply be flogged and reinstated. Roman generals were absolute realists. They needed living soldiers, not dead heroes, to instill fear. Sometimes a large-scale amnesty was declared army-wide before the start of particularly major military campaigns. The emperor would issue an edict promising full pardon to all deserters who returned to their units by a certain date. This was a brilliant political move that allowed them to quickly replenish their ranks with experienced heavy infantry at little cost. Modern states do something similar by announcing tax amnesties to repatriate capital that has fled to offshore accounts. People are always people, and the chance to start with a clean slate works flawlessly in absolutely any era. Those who stole government property or valuable weapons while fleeing were punished particularly harshly and mercilessly. Such people were classified not merely as fugitives, but as looters and dangerous thieves of state property. Their hands were cut off, or they were sent to perform hard labor in lead mines, a punishment tantamount to a death sentence in the making. Metal was too valuable a resource to allow ordinary soldiers to dispose of it as they saw fit. Weapons belonged exclusively to Rome, and any attempt to take them was regarded as a personal insult to the emperor himself. However, the punishment for desertion served another psychological purpose, hidden from outside eyes. Harsh trials and public floggings helped relieve the pent-up tension within the army's ranks. Soldiers who endured all the hardships and did not flee felt genuine hatred toward those who tried to take the easy way out. To them, a deserter was not just a pathetic coward, he was a selfish person who had shifted his workload onto their weary shoulders. Commanders channeled this hatred, allowing loyal soldiers to feel their moral superiority over those who were punished. Another surprising paradox was that the Roman system was capable of forgiving even mass-armed mutinies. If an entire legion rebelled, executing 5,000 men was physically and economically impossible. In such cases, the main ringleaders were identified and executed, while the rest of the soldiers were simply stripped of their basic privileges. They were forced to sleep outside the protected camp until they atoned for their guilt with the blood of their enemies. This form of collective shame worked remarkably well. The offending units fought like rabid wolves in the next battle. To a modern lawyer, Roman military law would seem like a savage cocktail of extreme cruelty and absolute arbitrariness. There were no cunning lawyers, impartial juries, or lengthy appeals to higher courts. The centurion brought the charge, the legate heard the case, and the executioner carried out the sentence. The entire judicial process could take literally 20 short minutes. But it was precisely this terrifying efficiency that made the system of punishment so devilishly effective and inescapable. When retribution comes immediately, a person simply has no time for foolish illusions and hopes. And yet, the fear of punishment is an external factor that requires the constant presence of a vigilant overseer. The Romans realized that it was impossible to station an armed guard behind every legionary around the clock. True discipline must come from within, from the very collective in which the soldier lives and fights every day. To solve this problem, they employed a social construct that became the unshakable foundation of all Roman military might. This construct was called the contubernium, and it is precisely this that we will discuss in our next important chapter. If you ask a historian what the main secret of the Roman army was, he is unlikely to mention swords or shields. He will name one simple Latin word, contubernium. which literally translates as shared soldier's tent. It was the tiniest, most basic unit of the legion, consisting of exactly 8 strong, armed soldiers. These men didn't just serve together. They were bound to one another more closely than many blood relatives. The contubernium was the foundation upon which the entire vast structure of Roman military superiority stood for millennia. Imagine living in a leather tent measuring about 10 square meters for 20 years. 8 adult, sweaty, rough men shared this tiny, confined space every night. Regardless of the weather, they had a single shared mule that carried their heavy tent, grain millstones, and spare tools. They ate from a single pot, pooled their money for common needs, and even took turns cooking. Today, sociologists would call this the ideal model of a closed social group with the highest level of interdependence. Why exactly 8 people? This is by no means a random number plucked out of thin air by lazy Roman bureaucrats. 8 soldiers fit perfectly into a standard tent, which could be quickly set up and taken down while on the march. 8 people could easily divide routine camp duties among themselves without unnecessary arguments or chaos. 2 prepared food, 2 repaired equipment, 2 stood night watch, and 2 rested before their shift. It was a brilliant, self-regulating micro-organization that required virtually no constant attention from officers. But the most important thing was that these people literally became a real family to one another. When you live side by side with the same guys for years, all social facades quickly fall away. They knew each other's slightest weaknesses, shared their fears, and told stories about their distant homes. If someone fell seriously ill, his tent mates would nurse him back to health and carry his gear during marches. An incredibly strong emotional bond formed, one that's physically impossible to create on ordinary training grounds. And this is where we come to the ingenious psychological manipulation employed by the shrewd Roman commanders. They deliberately used this sincere brotherly love as a tool for strict control and to prevent desertion. The Roman command ensured that any misconduct by one member of a contubernium cast a black mark on everyone else. If your tent mate fell asleep on guard duty, not only was he punished, but your entire innocent group of 8 was punished as well. You could be deprived of your meat ration, forced to clean the communal, foul-smelling latrines, or made to dig additional trenches. This system created incredible internal pressure within the group, where everyone kept a close eye on everyone else. If you decided to desert, you knew for certain that in the morning, your best friends would be brutally beaten for your actions. You weren't betraying some abstract emperor or a distant state. You were betraying the guy who had shared his bread with you just yesterday. Psychologically, getting past that was harder than risking your own life in the bloodiest battle. Human conscience and the gnawing fear of being condemned by loved ones were more effective than any shackles or prison bars. What's more, your fellow barracks mates would physically prevent you from doing something foolish under the cover of night. If someone noticed that his neighbor had started packing his things suspiciously, he would simply wake the others quietly. 8 burly guys could quickly and forcefully, with their fists, make a potential escapee understand he was in the wrong. The commanders didn't even find out about these nighttime incidents because the group dealt with problems harshly among themselves. It's an ideal management system where control is skillfully delegated to the very lowest level of a massive organization. In actual combat, this invisible bond worked even more effectively, transforming the 8 into a single, living, deadly organism. During battle, the soldiers of the contubernium stood shoulder to shoulder, covering one another with their massive shields. They instinctively sensed their comrades' movements and knew when to step forward and when to retreat in unison. If one fell, the others instantly closed ranks to protect him from the finishing blow of a ruthless enemy. Fighting alongside these sworn brothers is far more effective than fighting alongside strangers you're seeing for the first time. The modern US Army uses exactly the same concept, calling it the small fire team system. They divide an infantry squad into small groups of 4 men who train and live together constantly. Marines confirm that in an extreme situation, a soldier fights not for the flag, but for his own men. The Romans understood this psychological trait of the human species 2 millennia before the Pentagon came into existence. They simply transformed this natural herd instinct into a mathematically precise and ruthless military doctrine. And yet, what happened if a contubernium failed and an entire group cowardly fled the battlefield? In such catastrophic cases, Rome was forced to resort to measures that literally made one's blood run cold. When social control failed, the ruthless, bloody mathematics of collective punishment kicked in. It was the most terrifying word in the Roman military lexicon, one that turned even the most seasoned veterans' hair grey. We now turn to the darkest and most famous procedure of Roman military discipline, the legendary decimation. The word decimation is often used in modern news reports to describe major financial losses or destruction, but in ancient Rome, it was a specific, legally defined term denoting the most brutal form of collective punishment. It was applied only in the most extreme cases, during a mass flight from the battlefield or a major soldier's mutiny. The essence of decimation was the execution of every 10th person in the offending unit, chosen by random lot. It was a brutal form of ancient Russian roulette, where your life depended entirely on blind and indifferent luck. The procedure was carried out with incredible psychological sadism, designed to completely break the will to resist. The offending cohort was lined up on the parade ground, after which the silent soldiers were divided into groups of 10. Each group of 10 was given a small bag of stones, among which lay a single black or specially marked stone. The soldiers took turns drawing lots, praying to all their gods that they would draw the saving white stone. Whoever drew the black stone was doomed to immediate death, regardless of his actual guilt in the incident. But the most horrifying thing about decimation was not that a man was killed, but exactly how it happened. The execution was not entrusted to professional executioners or special punitive squads. It had to be carried out by the soldiers themselves. The 9 surviving comrades were required to beat the 10th to death with clubs or pelt him with heavy stones. Imagine this. You have to beat a guy to a pulp with your own hands, a guy with whom you shared bread in the tent just yesterday. My shoulders twitch nervously just from trying to imagine this unimaginable level of moral destruction of a person. Why did Rome need such extreme, almost theatrical cruelty toward its own people? The answer lies in a deep practical understanding of human psychology and the mechanisms of group responsibility. By forcing soldiers to cold-bloodedly kill their comrades, the command permanently destroyed the solidarity of potential mutineers. People bound by the blood of an innocent friend would never again be able to trust one another or rise up in rebellion. It was a method of radical field surgery, cutting away the gangrene of insubordination along with healthy muscle tissue. The 9 men who survived received no forgiveness. Their suffering was only just beginning. They were deprived of their tasty wheat rations and given hard barley instead, which was considered animal feed. They were no longer allowed to spend the night within the camp's secure perimeter and had to remain outside the fortified walls at night. In effect, they became living bait for enemy night saboteurs and hungry wild animals. They were forced to live in constant fear and shame until they atoned for their guilt in the next bloody battle. Interestingly, decimation was used extremely rarely because it inflicted irreparable damage on a unit's combat effectiveness. Killing 10% of the personnel meant voluntarily weakening one's army in the face of a real enemy. Most generals loudly threatened decimation, but at the last moment replaced it with less radical measures. The very existence of this punishment in the military regulations functioned like a nuclear weapon. It terrified people to death, but was rarely carried out. Fear of a small bag of stones with its iron grip kept thousands of tough, heavily armed men in line. The ancient historian Polybius wrote that the fear of decimation made Roman soldiers far more dangerous to the enemy. Faced with a choice between the inevitable prospect of a shameful death at the hands of his comrades and the risk of battle, the legionary chose battle. Better to die with honor at the hands of a barbarian's sword than to be beaten to death with clubs before the eyes of the entire legion, which stood by in contemptuous silence. This was a pure, cold calculation of the odds of survival, forcibly instilled in the minds of simple, uneducated peasants. Roman commanders did not ask their soldiers to be brave, they simply left them no other logical option. There is a well-known historical account of when Marcus Licinius Crassus carried out decimation during the Spartacus uprising. The Roman troops were so terrified of the invincible gladiators that they simply dropped their weapons and fled in disgrace. Crassus ordered an immediate drawing of lots and executed 4,000 of his own soldiers for cowardice. The result was immediate. The remnants of the army realized that their commander was more fearsome than any rebellious slave armed with a pitchfork. In the next battle, they literally tore Spartacus's army to shreds because there was nowhere to retreat. To modern people, such collective responsibility seems barbaric and a gross violation of individual rights. We are accustomed to the idea that everyone is responsible only for their own actions and personal mistakes in life. But in the ancient world, the concept of individuality meant far less than the sheer survival of the entire group. The army was a single living organism, and if one arm began to rot, it was ruthlessly severed to save the body. This harsh pragmatism allowed the Romans to survive defeats that would have guaranteed the destruction of any other civilization. To sum up this grim chapter, we see that Rome built its discipline on three enormous pillars: meticulous bureaucracy, social pressure from a small group, and a primal fear of collective punishment. But did this work in the long run, and why did this seemingly indestructible empire ultimately collapse? To answer this question, we need to examine how the Roman system adapted to the new challenges of the era. And what is most surprising is that many of these ancient methods are still alive today in our modern armies. We often greatly underestimate the ability of ancient people to manage vast amounts of precise data. It seems that without Excel spreadsheets and cloud servers, it would be completely impossible to keep track of an army of 500,000 soldiers. But the Romans were absolute fanatics when it came to bureaucracy, creating a paper-based system of astonishing mathematical efficiency. Each legion had a whole staff of scribes, clerks, and accountants who recorded literally every move the soldiers made. This invisible paper army was no less important for keeping the men in line than the centurions with their clubs. The Roman archives always kept a personal file on every recruit from the moment he arrived at the camp. They recorded his exact height, age, background, distinguishing features, and even any scars from past fights. They also kept meticulous records of the weapons, leather boots, tents, and daily grain rations issued to each soldier. If a soldier lost his helmet or broke his spear, the cost was immediately and ruthlessly deducted from his future pay. This financial stranglehold worked flawlessly. You'd hardly want to desert if the state owed you a pile of money. Indeed, here lies yet another ingenious secret behind Rome's control over vast numbers of armed men. Soldiers were paid only a small portion of their wages in cash, so they wouldn't drink it away at the nearest tavern. The bulk of the sum was held in a special regimental bank under the reliable guard of the legion's standard-bearer. This money accumulated over many years, turning into a very substantial pension fund for a weary veteran. Deserting meant leaving all one's savings in the hands of the state forever, which made desertion economically foolish. In addition, clerks kept strict records of all leave requests and permits to leave the camp. To simply go to a neighboring village for wine, a legionnaire had to obtain a clay tablet serving as a pass. Road patrols regularly and very meticulously checked these passes on every person in military uniform they encountered. If the date on the pass had expired, the soldier was automatically deemed a deserter, with all the grim consequences that entailed. This archaic pass system made it completely impossible for people to blend into the crowd under the pretext of a short walk. The daily morning roll calls were a true nightmare for anyone planning to escape under cover of darkness. The centurion would line up his centuria on the parade ground and read the names aloud from a long papyrus list. If anyone failed to respond, an active search was launched immediately without any bureaucratic red tape. Within an hour, a mounted patrol was already aggressively combing the surrounding area, armed with a detailed description of the missing person. Speed of response was key. A fugitive simply could not physically get far from the military camp. Interestingly, military bureaucracy even extended to soldiers' personal correspondence with their distant families. Archaeologists have found hundreds of letters at Fort Vindolanda in Britain, written on thin wooden tablets. Soldiers asked for warm socks, complained about the rainy weather, or asked wealthy relatives for money. But all these letters passed through the hands of military censors who looked for signs of brewing mutiny or demoralization. The command always wanted to know exactly what was on the troops' minds so they could nip problems in the bud before they escalated. Modern HR departments euphemistically call this gathering feedback and analyzing employee satisfaction. The Romans simply opened other people's letters and sent spies to soldiers' taverns to eavesdrop on conversations. When discontent in the camp reached a critical point, generals could increase rations or pay an extra bonus. This was the classic carrot and stick method, where the bureaucracy served as the perfect barometer of the crowd's mood. Managing collective anger is an art that Roman legates mastered to absolute perfection. One of the most important documents in a legionary's life was his military diploma, issued upon retirement. This bronze plaque officially confirmed that the man had honorably served his 25 years amid mud and blood. The diploma granted Roman citizenship, full exemption from taxes, and the right to legally marry a free woman. It was a golden ticket to a comfortable life, for which men gritted their teeth and endured all manner of abuse. Only the most desperate or the most foolish fools would risk such a jackpot for the sake of a momentary taste of freedom in the woods. The bureaucracy also made it possible to track the combat effectiveness of each individual unit in battle. There were special honor rolls of those awarded, where the feats of centurions and ordinary soldiers were recorded. Heroes were ceremoniously awarded silver medals, golden wreaths, and extra portions of fresh, delicious meat. Healthy competition between the cohorts compelled soldiers to maintain internal order better than any military police could. A unit whose performance suffered due to deserters was subjected to vicious ridicule from the rest of the camp. Ultimately, the great Roman Empire was built not only on blood, but also on gigantic mountains of papyrus. Meticulous record-keeping and total control transformed a disorganized mob into a well-oiled and predictable state apparatus. Bureaucracy became the invisible glue that kept this colossus from falling apart for hundreds of years. And although the parchments have long since decayed, the very principles of this system of governance live on in every modern military regulation. Let's take a look at how ancient Roman concepts are applied in modern warfare. If you visit any modern military base today, you'll be surprised at how much of ancient Rome remains there. Of course, soldiers no longer wear heavy bronze helmets or march in leather sandals on wet gravel, but the psychological foundation of training and control has remained absolutely unchanged over the course of 2 long millennia. Modern generals read the same ancient authors, trying to understand the secrets of managing vast masses of frightened people. And the first thing they copy, without the slightest change, is the Roman concept of a small, closed social group. As we've already mentioned, the US Army is organized into squads of 4 or 8 men. They live in the same cramped barracks, navigate obstacle courses together, and bear collective responsibility for mistakes. Instructors at training camps deliberately and harshly punish the entire platoon for the dirty boots of a single recruit. Sounds painfully familiar, doesn't it? The psychology of shame and interdependence works exactly the same way today as it did in the time of Julius Caesar. Contemporary military sociologists have conducted numerous studies on the reasons behind soldiers' resilience in combat zones. It turns out that patriotism, belief in democracy, or hatred of the enemy rank last among their motivations. The main reason a soldier doesn't run away under heavy fire is his unwillingness to let down his comrades in his unit. The brotherhood forged under harsh conditions proves stronger than even the most powerful human instinct for self-preservation. The Romans didn't write doctoral dissertations on sociology. They simply knew this from experience and put it to full use. Even Roman methods of endurance training are referred to today with buzzwords like hybrid tactical fitness. Marching long distances with a heavy backpack is used by elite units such as the British SAS or the Navy SEALs. Modern sports coaches call this the development of basic aerobic endurance and tough mental resilience. The Romans simply gave a soldier 30 kilograms of gear and told him to keep going until the sun went down. The body's physiological adaptation to extreme stress has not changed at all since ancient times. The system of long-term military pensions and setting aside a portion of pay in savings accounts has also survived intact to this day. Governments understand perfectly well that a financial incentive is one of the best ways to keep professionals in the military. In the US, soldiers are entitled to lifetime health insurance and a generous pension after 20 years of service. In the same way, a weary Roman legionary awaited his bronze diploma after 25 years of endless marches. People are always willing to endure hardships in the present for the sake of guaranteed stability and peace of mind in their approaching old age. But there are things that the modern civilized world has categorically refused to adopt from brutal antiquity. Decimation has been consigned to the past forever as a barbaric and utterly inhumane method of controlling a frightened crowd. Today, desertion is tried on a case-by-case basis, with defendants provided with lawyers and the opportunity to defend themselves in a lawful military tribunal. The death penalty for desertion has been abolished in most developed countries, even under the harsh conditions of wartime. Human life has acquired value in and of itself, ceasing to be merely a disposable resource for achieving victory. Nevertheless, the problem of desertion has not disappeared. It has simply taken on a new form in our digital age. Today, deserters do not hide in dense forests. They cross borders using fake passports or disappear into major cities. The search for criminals has become much faster thanks to electronic databases, but there are also more ways to hide. Modern authorities don't need to check carts on muddy roads. They analyze phone records and surveillance footage. Technology has changed beyond recognition, but the eternal game of cat and mouse between the state and the fugitive continues. The Roman experience clearly shows us one fundamental truth about the nature of political power and control. It is impossible to sustain a system indefinitely based solely on primal fear and violence, no matter how effective it may seem at first. When the empire began to experience a deep economic crisis and stopped paying its soldiers with hard cash, discipline collapsed. No amount of lofty oaths, feasts, or threats of decimation could compel a starving legionary to go and die for nothing. As soon as the material benefits of service disappeared, the entire bureaucratic machinery of pursuit collapsed under the weight of chaos. Herein lies the main historical lesson for any modern commander and self-assured head of state. An army is strong only as long as its soldiers believe in the social contract they have entered into with the state. For centuries, the Romans upheld this contract by skillfully combining severe punishments with enormous privileges for loyal soldiers. It was a perfectly balanced blend of the primal fear of death and simple human greed. And as long as this delicate balance was maintained, Roman eagles soared proudly over half of the known civilized world. When we study the military history of Rome, it's as if we're looking into a clear mirror that reflects our own nature. We see people exactly like us, people who fear pain, long for home, and look for loopholes in strict rules. And we see a brilliant system that took these weaknesses and forged them into an impenetrable shield for the empire. Ancient people weren't any less intelligent than we are. They simply didn't have iPhones to distract them from solving complex problems. They tackled survival challenges with an icy efficiency that our modern, laid-back world can only envy. We've traveled a long way along the dusty roads of antiquity to understand how this gigantic war machine operated. We've seen that Rome triumphed not only thanks to cunning tactics or the sharpness of its short iron swords. Its main superpower was the ability to organize chaos and manage the psychology of 500,000 armed men. Desertion was a perfectly natural reaction of an ordinary person to the inhuman conditions of long military service. But the system created to combat this phenomenon turned out to be a true masterpiece of ruthless social engineering. Contubernium vividly showed us how 8 random people could be transformed into a single, indivisible living organism. The brotherhood forged in the tent became the most powerful emotional anchor that kept a soldier in his place under a hail of enemy arrows. The fear of letting their comrades down proved to be a far more reliable motivator than abstract oaths of loyalty to a distant senate. This discovery became the solid foundation of military psychology, which humanity continues to use successfully to this day. And it is precisely this fact that makes Roman history so strikingly vivid and relevant to our generation. With that, Our historical stop is officially over, and it's time to pack up our tents for another long march. Don't forget that knowledge is the lightest gear. It never weighs down your shoulders on the march. Explore this world, ask tough questions, and never believe the glossy myths from Hollywood historical films. See you in the next video, where we'll take a detailed look at yet another crazy, forgotten technology of the ancient world. Until next time, and may your own trusty contubernium always have your back.